Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to Rise of the GM podcast, where today we're going to be talking about a Wizards rivalry. We're going to look at campaign arcs and planning those, and then talk about an eccentric wizard, all here on Rise of the GM. All right. Well, hey, we're back again today, and we are in the middle of a planning little trilogy of planning topics. We talked last week about planning a campaign and kind of what goes into that as you're starting to do the whole long-term campaign and get that plan going. Today, we're narrowing that down. We're going to talk about planning the arc, planning something that is just going to be the next few sessions. And then next time we talk, actually not next week, because next week we're going to have a Thanksgiving special, right? A short Thanksgiving feast. Yep. And then, but the following week, we will wrap up this planning topic, and that will be planning the exact session as you get ready to go into a night, what you need to do to plan there. But today we're in that middle ground. So we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But before we do, we are going to talk about our encounter that we have every time we have this little encounter starter that you can use if you're just looking for something to drop into a campaign. And this may be the one for you. So we're going to start here with the Wizards rivalry, or the Wizards rivalry. I'll just say that 4 times until I can't say it anymore. All right, let me read this, then we'll talk about it a little bit, or kind of discuss this. You have 2 members of a prominent Wizards guild who seek a very rare spell component. And the wizard who possesses the component will have prestige, will win prestige and bragging rights because of this. But the 2 mages are aware that there's only one place where the component can be found, and it's inside an old ruined wizard school. And so they decide to make things interesting by turning their hunt into a contest. Each hires a group of adventurers to retrieve the component, and they promise to use only minor magic to make things interesting for the adventurers. Now, the thing is, they don't tell the adventurers this. So you got these 2 wizards in like a gentleman's club, and they're like, oh, let's just make it interesting, shall we? And so they do this. The PCs in your group are hired by one of the wizards to retrieve the components for a fee. What the wizard doesn't tell them is that there's a second group of adventurers who are on the same quest at the same time. And so there's going to be some run-ins there. The next morning, the PCs are ready to leave for the ruins, and they find their horses are gone. That's a small trick by the rival wizard, okay? Little things like this keep happening to the PCs until they reach the ruins. After suffering several magical practical jokes, the PCs reach the ruins and begin their exploration. And along the way, they discover, as they're in these ruins, that they're not alone. So they see signs of a battle, monsters, blood, doors that have been spiked shut, ropes hanging from high ledges where someone had climbed there, and they get the sense someone else is here in these ruins. Following one or more encounters with monsters, the PCs reach the chamber that contains the component here in this old wizard's school, and the other group of adventurers arrives at the same time. And so you'll have to figure out, as the GM, how that's going to look. How will the PCs react? Will they try to make a deal with the other adventurers? Who will get the components to their patron first? All these are questions you get to answer. Depending on the tone of the campaign and the nature of the other adventuring party, this plot can be serious and life-threatening, or it can be funny, right? It can be lighthearted if the parties try to trick or steal the components from one another, or it can get gritty and dark pretty quick if the adventurers become violent and try to kill the poachers. And again, you can kind of help nudge this in one direction or the other. If they survive, you can also use the other party as recurring rivals throughout your campaign. And I think we've done that sort of thing before, where there's been a second adventuring party. I remember particularly we had one, the Wanderers, I think they were called.
Travelers and the Wanderers.
The Travelers and the Wanderers. We were one of those parties. I can't even remember now. And they were the other one. And we did meet back up a few times. But so you have this couple of wizards who, as a little gentleman's adventure or a little gentleman's bet, they decide they both want this, and they decide to make it hard. They don't tell the adventurers. So what kind of stuff do you make if you would have this kind of encounter that you would think, I might drop this into the campaign? How would that look? What would this look like to you?
Yeah. I think there's because you don't want to tip the hand of right away that there's like more people involved in this.
Right.
But I do, when you said gentlemen's, like kind of, uh, yeah, these two wizards in like a smoking lounge or something, like that, that I kind of like the idea of, even if it's just a tavern, that something going on in this like tavern that these PCs are in, you see these wizards in a hefty debate, over here, and that could even, it's not necessarily going to be like, oh yeah, they're going to be my team. You better watch out because they're coming for you, kind of thing. But that they even would be able to later look back and be like, oh, that conversation was happening, like after all of this. Then I kind of like the idea of that being, or maybe these guys are arguing, and then one of the wizards comes over, and it's like, you guys look like you can handle yourselves. Anyone looking for a job? Like that kind of thing, being able to tie into the game.
Well, it might be cool, just kind of going off that, because I like that idea of you could maybe spy them in the back room in that, like, leather and wood and smoky,
Yeah.
that
Right,
gentleman's club sort of feel.
Mm-hmm.
You see these two talking, and maybe there's something about the other one that stands out physically,
Right.
so that he's memorable.
Yeah.
And then you see him. They kind of come out, and the one kind of looks around and walks over to you guys and starts a conversation. But you maybe also notice before they come to the door, you're sitting in this place, and as the DM or the GM, you describe the room. You can say, there's several people scattered. It looks like another adventuring party or two are in the room. One of them has, and you describe some characteristics that would again stick out in your mind. And you see maybe that other guy go over and talk to them without pointing that out, so that it becomes like, oh, this is important. Somehow let them know that, or maybe you just point out what they look like, and you don't ever show the other guy go talk to them. But then when they are in this school and they finally walk into the same room at the same time, you recognize, wait, these are those guys who were in that, and so then maybe the pieces start to get put together.
Yeah, that's cool. That's that cool foreshadowing, that I feel like we kind of speak into every now and then. But
this is the kind of thing that, as a GM, if you want that to have those kinds of satisfying, like, oh yeah, moments, this is the pre-planning part.
Yeah.
Because this is a little encounter you can drop in. And you could get to the end and it's like, oh, there's two parties after this, and you just know it's a random generic party. But if you do something very specific, then it's just a little bit of planning, but it can like really make the campaign seem like more permanent, more ongoing than just we're just facing like something random that just came in here.
For sure. Yeah, I like the idea too. Kind of bouncing with that again. Maybe these, whatever this other adventuring party is, that you can foster some friendship even prior, because I think that even like adds another element. And a question, I wanted to throw to you in a second is that idea of like serious versus kind of funny, like where do you go? What's your inclination? But, I think there's a complexity there that, like, okay, they've been in the tavern. We don't really realize what's going on. That fighter over there buys our party a drink. They hang out through the night, and their friendships are formed and tales are told and all these things. And then you go on your separate ways, and then you show up at this wizard school, and both parties are looking down onto this library or whatever where this thing is kept, and you realize, oh shoot, we're in competition here. What are we going to do? Kind of thing. And I think you could add there's a tension there of like, okay, well, these are supposed to be friendlies. Do we work together now? And I also wonder about, kind of to go into this, funny or serious, like, is there a point where you even like bring people together? Kind of thing of, there's a trap that when you finagle with this thing, it fills the room up with water, and you can only get out if you work together, and then like, how does that kind of thing, or is this just like knockdown, drag out fight? Whoever gets to it first wins, kind of thing. Do you have like even from a DMing standpoint, like how do you see yourself moving with that?
Yeah, so this is one of those instances where I would totally follow the lead of my PCs. So they're going to, if I think you can at the beginning make that, tales are told, camaraderie is built, and then you happen to face these people. That puts the dilemma.
Yeah.
And then you lay that in their lap and see what they do. I think I've encountered some groups that no matter who they come across, they're ready to kill them and take what's theirs. And then I've come across other groups where they just can't see, I can't just kill this person because I don't think they're evil. They're just doing their job, and who knows what your group is going to be. I would let this turn into whatever they wanted it to be. If they wanted to, I think it could very easily, if they've already kind of built a relationship, turn into something where they say, okay, these two rich guys are just having fun at our expense. What about us taking some agency in this and deciding we're not going to give it to either one, or we're going to play them against each other in some way, and again, that would have to be them coming up with that. But I think I would probably allow it to turn cooperative or competitive on their decision. And I'd be okay with either one if I were running this. If they wanted to like go at each other and figure out how to, kill everybody and get it on their own, that would be them. And maybe I would make some consequences to that. And then if they decided to do together, they would have to come up with an idea and I would react to it.
Right. Yeah.
And I found that they seem to always have an idea that they come up with. And then I'm like, okay, let's see, how can I make that work?
I think it could be interesting to pull the split the party, but what happens is half of the other group and half of the party get divided from the other halves, and then they have to work together, whether it's like, there's creatures that we're not strong enough to fight just the two of us, we need these two guys too, or or like, well, we're in a position where she needs to stand on my shoulders, even though we're kind of competitors right now, so she can reach the door so that I can pull myself up. I think it'd be interesting to even do that, where you could force them to work together, but then you're splitting the party and that gets kind of funky a lot of times too. So I don't know. I think even, if this wasn't for you GMs out there, you're like, this doesn't really feel like something that's going to fit in. I think one of the points they're making of that idea where you're walking through the dungeon and you see like the rope hanging down, or like there's a creature that's already been killed over here, or that kind of thing. I think that stuff's really good for just considering the dungeons or the rooms or whatever explorations that are happening. Once again, it's like more fleshing out of the thing. It's not just these stark walls that no one has ever touched ever, but there's like signs of life, even if it's not, there's another party of people coming into whatever we're doing. I think that can really help like bring some depth to things too.
And we get so used to, our PCs get so used to, well, the rest of the world are these NPCs that are here for our sake, but we are the ones who matter, to realize, okay, there are other player characters in the world who are also out trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it can be played well. So this could be one that would be interesting. I think for me, the thing that would make it the most interesting is that pre-recognition of them in the bar and what could later be recalled as, I think they were like making a deal or like setting up some sort of contest. And then the other interesting part is when you and the other group both walk in. And there's that recognition, and then throw it out there and see what the players do.
Right.
And I think that's the fun of being a GM, is basically making small dilemmas, making small scenarios, throwing them in and saying, what happens? Shake it up. It's like throwing a bunch of ants in a box and shaking it and seeing what happens. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that could be a lot of fun. And that also, it throws a bunch of new characters into the mix too, just that one like thing. So, and
somebody there may really stick with your party. They may, stick, or none of them may.
Yeah.
Again, you have to allow that.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. That's cool.
All right. Well, that's our encounter starter that we threw out there, the Wizards rivalry, and so you can see if that's something you drop in. If you drop that into a campaign and it works out well, let us know what your characters did. Come back on here in some comment section and say, "Hey, I did that Wizards rivalry, and here's what happened," because we'd love to hear that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
that'd be sweet.
Maybe your players even come up with an idea that we're like, "Wow, that would be great to throw in our campaign." So do that. Hey, let's move on to our planning talk of the day. This is our kind of a main topic today. We talked last time about you're getting ready to start a campaign from scratch. What's the whole planning process you go into? And we had a lot that we talked about there as far as how you do that, how it grows, etc. But now you come down one level to you're in your campaign. You've started your campaign. I'm gonna pretend that today we're not doing the first arc, okay? Because I kind of feel that we kind of kicked off. How do you kick off the arc last time? Now you're in your campaign. They've gotten to know each other. Things are going. You're planning the next campaign arc, okay, whatever that is. What kinds of things go into that planning? How do you get your idea? How do you decide where to start? How do you decide where it's going to end? How much do you plan? All of this stuff about each arc. And again, I told you we're going to get later to, hey, tonight I have a session. How do I plan that session? But tonight's that middle ground. How do you plan the arc? And I'm going to let you start by talking about like when it's you and you have a group that you're getting ready to kind of enter a new chapter of the story. You just kind of finished a chapter. You're getting ready to start that arc. How does your planning for that? How does that go? What's that look like for you?
Yeah. A little like maybe undergirding here. So I never ever thought in terms of arcs until more recently in my like gaming and GMing lifespan here. And I think part of that was again, we've talked about Danny a bunch in the WoW game, but that never felt to me like a series of okay, we've accomplished and I can look back at the story. I remember a lot of it to this day, and I can see those things, but it all just felt so complete that when I was like, oh, like a campaign actually really just for all of you, you can do whatever you want. You can formulate this however you want. So just be aware of that. But it's like, oh, like a campaign is like multiple kind of things that get completed and build. And up to this point, was kind of maybe a new idea for me rather than just one story. And so one thing I want to toss out is like, when I think of arcs, I don't know that I don't know that the players necessarily have to like be aware, okay, we're starting arc 2, kind of thing. And there have been moments where I feel like I've been vocal about that as a GM of like, hey, we're kind of moving into a new arc of the thing. But I think it is a good tool like for us, even in the background of like our prep of thinking in terms of how to like parcel this out and kind of keep it moving in a certain way, maybe changing gears on things. So I just kind of wanted to undergird that a little bit of that's kind of where I come from when I talk about an arc. But so I'm in an interesting place right now because our Jade Masks game that will be tonight is our Thursday night game. I am like, so pulling back the veil, we're basically at the end of an arc right now of kind of some things have happened that are all been kind of together, or the beginning of a new arc, is kind of where it's at. And so I'm in this interesting place of trying to wrap up a little bit of what this immediate story has been. And what I'm doing now, part of me is like, okay, there could be a huge encounter, and I don't want to spoil things here, but like there could be a huge encounter here. Looking at tonight, likely it's going to take up a lot of tonight, like between battle, repercussions of the battle, conversations that probably happen surrounding the battle. Like all that's going to take up a good portion of our game time. But I also want to know, like, okay, where are we going to go, or where could we go? Where would we likely go out of this to the next thing? And so when I'm walking into that of like a start of a new arc, I like to come into that with multiple possibilities that I have already thought through. So for this one particularly, right now where I'm at, like kind of post starting the new arc, I've got 3 that I'm like, this is where they likely are going to go, one of these 3 directions. And I'm being vague again. Matthew's in the game. People who watch us are in the game. Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep into that, but that's kind of where I'm at in the moment of getting ready to start a new arc. Is the thing I want to think about currently is where could they be going, and as we move into that, there's going to be at this point where the party chooses something. Like, do they go to A, to B, to C? And that's going to play a big role in like what the next groups of games are going to look at, like where it's going to be locationally. But I definitely am like spotlighting. I think there was a question about even like world and how you build your world and the scope of that a while ago. Maybe that was last time we even talked. And I tend to like zoom in. I'm trying to remember those current events that are out here. It's like, okay, power has shifted over here. This guy got left alive and he's causing trouble over here. But where is the group at? And when those choices are made, it's kind of like killing off the timeline. You can just like bring it in, and I'm going to focus in now on what's specifically here, and we're going to follow that line. So that's a little bit kind of where I'm at right now, being vague. I've got more stuff, but where are you at, Matthew, when you like are starting a new kind of segment of the game, a new arc of the game? What are the things you're thinking through?
So for me, I think the first thing you have to do as a GM is decide what is an arc. What's going to define an arc for me? So you have your campaign, right? Your full campaign in my head. Let's say in the Blood of Kings, I think that was the one where I had the 9 moons, and I'm like, okay, so what the entire arc is going to be is they're going to start in this place, and they're going to wake up on these tables, experimentation tables, and they don't know what's going on. And there's people raiding the castle or whatever. And the place that I want to get them to is this. This is kind of my overarching arc. What's going to be my each individual arc? What's going to specify that? And so for me, typically that is one of 2 things. It's either places or goals. And so as a GM yourself, think, what are the major goals or what are the major places? So in my current campaign, there are 7 kingdoms. Those 7 kingdoms all had their own, the old gods, right? Yeah, this is so different than everything you've ever heard of, right? Game of Thrones people, 7 kingdoms, 7 old gods. But anyway, there was these 7 kingdoms. And so very much I immediately began thinking, okay, they're going to start in West Varan. They're going to start in West Varan. And there are also these power stones that they were looking for, that they didn't know that at the beginning, but it kind of became known that there are these different stones of power. And as they collect those, they're heading towards something. They don't know what, but they get this idea that they need to collect these. And so very easily, my campaign, the small little campaign arcs, not the whole campaign, but the each arc could be getting this power stone or their time in this kingdom. Okay. And so I had to decide what that's going to be. And so for me, it became more about, at the beginning, getting each power stone, because in one of them, they left I always have to think, they left East Varan and went to Ramensat. Those are 2 different kingdoms, but they were in pursuit of one of those Power Stones. So they had this whole arc of Power Stone around getting the Wrath Stone first. Then they had this whole arc around getting the Crystal Ball, the Stone of Luck, and then they had one against getting the I forget what the sandstone, the one of time manipulation. And they had, one. And so each of these, they might go to different continents and different places, but I was making the arc, the getting of that. Okay. And so that might have several locations. They may teleport. And one of them, they were, all the way in Telerishi on one side of the continent. And they ended up going to see this weird dude who had dolls hanging by little threads all over the place. And they teleported to the other side of the kingdom. And all of this was still in the arc of getting the Orbion, as we came to call it, the Orb Beyond, which one of my characters misheard as Orbion, and that became its name. So getting the Orbion so it wasn't divided into place for me; it was divided into goal. And so I think the first thing you have to do as a GM is decide what's going to be the demarcation of an arc. And so once you kind of have that, now here's the thing about that campaign. There's the overall arching campaign, and then I knew that they had to end up completing the quest to get these 7 stones, and they could do that in whatever order they chose. That's the beauty of not railroading, right? They could decide right at the beginning, we're heading over there and we're going after that, and I began to plan that arc around that then. But they did all of this, and they have finally collected the 7 stones. But then there's more. And so now it's not, my arcs are no longer defined by getting the stones. That was the first 7 arcs of my campaign. But then the arcs become, once they get those 7 stones, what is it that has to happen? And so the goals are no longer like getting the stones, but now it's about very specific parts that are leading up. And I'm not going to talk about what those parts are because, again, this is an ongoing campaign. But I have in my mind, I know what the next arcs, the next goals. And so for me, typically, it's goals that demark each arc that I have to then plan out. Again, when I did Blood of Kings, which was set up in this teleportation circle that went to 9 different moons, each of those moons was its own place with its own, they had to do something there. And once they completed that moon was pretty much complete. You think about a video game, you go to one world and you do everything there, then you teleport back to your little teleportation circle and you go to the next one. That one was very much place, although there was a goal in each place, but it wasn't one of those things where they're just going to be kind of constantly teleporting back and forth between all these moons and this stuff. So that one was very much place oriented for me. And so that can be different depending on your campaign and what you're telling in your story. But I think the first thing is you have to decide what is it that's going to demark an arc. Okay. Then once you get that, so like, let's go back, let's say to you guys were getting the sandstone. Okay. So they had to go to this place called the Temple of Tears. And in this place, it was in the middle of this kingdom that was all sand. It was called the Strand. And it is a place just made up of all, desert. And in there, they would encounter this place where they found this one stone, and then they would eventually get that and get out of there, and then they would begin their next arc. And so I had to, in that arc, then decide what's the beginning of this going to look like? What are the obstacles in this going to look like? How do they, the goal obviously in this one was to get the stone, and then how do they get out? So those are the things, like as far as my markers, how do they get in? Major obstacles, what says success, and then how do you get out? Those 4 things. And then when we went to the next place, I think you went from there to Ramensat, and it was like the crystal ball. And you had to go into that heavily trapped fortress of the dwarves, and all of the mountains between there with the alchemist and the little spider creature and all this. You people listening won't understand all of the references, but it's not just like you go to a place and that's an arc. So they went, they ended up in these mountain peaks, and somebody, Dastan Basilisk, was going to tell them how to get to a place where there was this big, giant construct, the perfect construct that they were looking for. But before they got to that construct, they had to go into I forget what I called it, the fortress of the dwarves, but it was like bad.
Crystal Cavern or...
something. And they went in there and nearly died several times. A lot of traps in there, and they had to defeat like a demonling that was trying to become more. And then they came out of there, and they finally got to, and they got that stone in there. But then when they came out, they ended up going to the peak. They finally, talked to this alchemist, who then, once they rescued this invention that he'd made, taken that back. He then told them how to get to the peak. They got to the peak, and at that point, they kind of were set on their next,
Yeah, right.
to go find the one that was in Telerici. So again, I had to look at how did they enter. They entered by teleporting from the Strand over to this, on a mountain pass is where they started, and then they had to go to this guy on the peaks. They had to follow his little side trail, and in doing so, they ended up going to this place. They found the stone. They come back. They talk to him. He tells them how to get to the next place and how do they get out. Okay, so again, I had marker points along the way. In all of that, certain things would happen that were unplanned that would build into part of that arc, and at the same time, I was kind of going through the parts of that checkpoint of each part in that arc. So I've kind of talked a lot about my idea is making sure I understand what is an arc before I start. And like you said, when you first start playing D, you may not realize, you may not think in terms of arcs. You may just think, okay, this is just one, this exciting thing happened, and then we went to this place, and this exciting thing happened, and this, and we kind of have this overall goal, and you may not yet be recognizing arcs because you haven't been thinking that way. But as you become a GM and you're planning, you probably need some of those arcs. When people go to write a novel, one of the hardest things to do is when somebody sits down in front of a typewriter and they just decide to start typing a story. It's like, okay, there was this guy and he was traveling along in his little, country hamlet, and then some things happened and he was, known to be greater, and he went to this place, and you're just trying to write a story straight through. It's going to sound like you're rambling.
Right.
Okay. When you start writing a story like that, every book on writing a novel will tell you, okay, first decide your major arcs, and then in those arcs, divide those down into smaller arcs. And they often tell you to take an index card and say, this is the first main arc. Okay. That first main arc breaks into 3 sub arcs. Each of those arcs will have 3 movements in each one. And so then once you outline all of that, then you start writing the story. Right. It's a lot more interesting because you know how to weave in parts and show that progress. And all of that organization, though, is not in the reader's mind when they sit down to read the book. They start reading the book and they just follow it word for word until they get to the end, and it hit this big climax and had the denouement and all that stuff. They didn't really necessarily look for the arcs until they were past them. And it's the same thing as a GM. You're like an author. We talk about this all the time. It's writing great stories together, or not writing. It's acting. It's creating great stories together with your PCs. And so, as a GM, you're going to think a little more like an author than a reader.
Yeah. I think the literary reference is really good too. I was thinking that maybe a simplified way to think is even, okay, if we have a trilogy that's been written, the way those arcs look are like the book. So go back to my Lord of the Rings, thing here. It's like first arc is kind of the understanding of the quest and moving through here to this point of the fellowship is created, but then it breaks at the end of the first book. Second arc kind of follows multiple people, but one is trying to get to Mordor and being kind of that, having hiccups through that way, and then finally getting to crossing into Mordor for some of them. Some of the other ones, it's going into the first battles, having a victory, but knowing bigger battles are to come. Third arc, massive battle, all the stuff that goes into that, finally ending with, spoiler, the ring goes in the mountain.
What?
It's like, so, and there's victory, and I think that's like a maybe generalized way to think about arcs. Like if you haven't thought through those, but pick your favorite trilogy. That's kind of how those things are moving. It's escalating. Say those two things again, Matthew. One was location, the other one was like accomplishment or
Goals. Yeah.
goals. Yeah.
So the goal of getting the stones for me, and then I
Right.
have goals beyond those stones.
Yeah.
That's going to end in the major goal, the
Right.
overall goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like really, really good. That's like a great way to demarking that. Um, I like to have kind of be moving toward a resolution, not full resolution if it's not the final arc, but like that there's kind of or even think about a series of a show you like, kind of thing. It resolves, but it also leaves things open to move forward. And um, looking at like, what is that's the goal thing, I think, of like, how can this resolve some things, but create more avenues for it to go out from here. I also really like either the end or the beginning, however you want to look at it, of an arc to, uh, I don't want to say lore dump, but like there are moments of you're more things are being revealed to you. So, and look, Jade Masks again. The first arc was really just establishing yourself in the city as these people in the Thieves Guild, and but then there was a little bit of a reveal of, okay, so like weird things are happening. There's like multiple kind of weird groups that are converging on the city for some reason. Also, the head of the Thieves Guild has the secret and he wants you to take him so he can like lay down the mantle of being this like head. That was kind of first arc. Second arc was basically the travel, seeing him through to the end. But then that opened up a whole another thing, because when he laid down the mantle, you also are interacting with the bigger picture of all these ley lines that we've kind of talked about, and actually interacting with an avatar of a god, and being like, oh, something bigger is happening here, but we don't really know what. Third arc was kind of coming back and then getting connected into the city more. That the resolve, and it wasn't so much a goal. I guess it was more locational, but it's like the resolve was you finally came down to kind of this hub of all these ley lines and had a greater understanding because you had a vision of, oh, so these gods captured or imprisoned this Titan from long ago, and that's what these things are about. And now some of these lines are breaking. We may want to do something about that, so that kind of ended that one. And then this arc that you've been on now is like traveling to try to fix that problem, and so I like to have the resolve and then the kind of continuing reveal to be part of those changes into a new arc too. But I really like that way of thinking of like, okay, what are the goals, or where is the location, that when we deal with this and we move on, that's kind of the new shift kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that is really cool.
And there's a question in here. Again, I'm always going to try and hit both sides of this, because I know there are people in both places, but like, what's the difference in a campaign arc when you are kind of creating everything, and a campaign arc where you're like taking a module now? Okay. So It's not like a full written campaign, but there's a full written module, and you're like, I would like to place this in as this arc.
Yeah.
And so if you do that, as far as how much do you plan to start? That's the kind of question I'm getting to here. When you are putting in, so I put in Veil of the Frozen Tears, which is a written module. I took it and twisted it and ripped parts out completely and put parts in, and I connected it to my overall world history and, mythology and all of that stuff, as far as where I wanted things to go and who the deities and demons and such were, and where things had come from. So it wasn't like I just dropped it in and ran it exactly as the module said, but I used a good part of this module. To do that, and we talked about this some last week, I had to read that module through a lot of times to get my brain around every aspect of not only where it went in the module, but also where am I changing things so that
Yeah.
it's not this person who's the bad guy at the end, but that just opens the door to where they're going next.
Mm.
And here's how I'm going to tie this in, graft it
Yeah.
into my campaign. So more planning has to happen if I'm using a module than if I am kind of freewheeling, I guess you could say. Like if I have a module and I know, okay, when I did the Temple of Tears thing I was just talking about in the Strand, there was no module involved in that. I knew they were going to enter in this sand. I knew they were going to meet someone named Amira. I knew that they were going to, oh wait, that happened. Yeah. Anyway, they were going to end up traveling to this Temple of Tears. They were going to have all of the encounters that I had planned in there. They were going to then, leave that place and come to this huge giant gate that would teleport them. So I had my markers, but I could be a little more free as I'm going to develop any one area. And I could be a little bit more free to add encounters and because it wasn't so much that I had to make. I was making this as I went. And so there's a little bit different as far as how much do you plan to start. When I started that Temple of Tears, it was more rudimentary with I had maybe the idea of the first couple sessions, and I had the idea of the great Temple of Tears sessions pretty much worked out in my head, but there was a lot of more freedom getting to those places, getting from those places, and developing in between those places. When I drop a module in, which some of you will do, and I highly recommend using modules to spark imagination and keep you from just having the same kind of scenes over and over again in your work, because there's a lot of really good modules out there. But I also recommend adapting those to fit. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to do that, I've got to do a lot more planning, and I've got to have a real good sense of how this is going to run all the way through. Now, will exact sessions be planned? That's a topic for the session planning, but I'm going to spoil it. Yeah. No, I won't plan every session, but I will know where it's going because it has to in order to follow the module.
Yeah. Kind of illustrative thing. If we go back to, so, we're talking again, this is mostly focused in the D&D Pathfinder fantasy RPG kind of, I feel like our conversations here, but go back to our conversation with Sam Grant a while ago about the Sentinels RPG. The way that those are kind of gathered is you're like, I don't want to call it a session because I'm always slow and turn every one into two, even though it's a one, but it's like an adventure, kind of thing. Issue is what the SCRPG calls it, is like, this is issue number one, and this is where, like in the game I'm running, issue one was there, they find out that there are these drugs being sold that are giving people superpowers from a reporter, and she meets them, and then they witness it happen, and then they track down the baddie who was doing the selling to the distribution place. They beat up a bunch of thugs, and they find out from a kind of a bigger villain, oh, this is a bigger deal than what we thought. Like, that's like issue one. It's the first adventure. And I'm digressing. What you do though is I think it's 6 of those is what's called a collection in the SCRPG terminology. And I think that's like a good way, because you do those issues, you come to a collection end, and that's like the resolve, that's the resolution, that's the meeting of the goal or the finishing of the location kind of thing, where this has been packaged, but that doesn't mean the story is over, kind of thing. And you continue to build these collections up into a larger campaign. And I think that's like another way for me to like kind of wrap my brain around like an arc deal is how would this story all kind of have somewhat of a bow on it, but not so much that it's done, but it's going to continue. But there's been growth that happens because of that, and experience and more story and goals have been met, that kind of stuff. So I just trying to kind of wrap my brain around more of the arc idea. And again, I think that's helpful for the GM. Whereas like as a player, I'm kind of noting those things. Like for me with the stones, it's like, oh, there is a sense of like we accomplished something because we now have this. And it's not just like, oh, well, somebody just got more powerful because we can make use of this, which is also a perk. But it's like, this was a mission, this was a quest we have been given, or we have taken upon ourselves, one way or the other. But we have this thing now, and we're that much farther along. We're moving on to the next thing. So I feel like I note that as a player, but you never said, okay, now it's time for the Arc of the Sandstone. Like that's not a thing. So I definitely like, it's super helpful for me as a design, as I'm designing games, as I'm not designing games, but designing the story to the best I can, of like thinking through that.
Yeah. And remember, as you guys are beginning your GM process and life of GMing, you'll probably start off by saying, hey, I'd like to run a session or two.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at what's called a one shot. One shot is a couple sessions that give the characters a chance to kind of play as those characters and know them, but there's not a whole lot beyond that. You're getting a feel for it. You may only go one level. You may not even go a level up in your one shot. When you get to an arc, so you may say, okay, I want to run, several sessions, not just a one shot where it's like we come in and play for one time or maybe two, and we finish one little goal, but I'm going to kind of run a series of goals together that make a story. And then that's kind of like what he was talking about with the collection, right? For the Sentinels comic RPG. But then there's that whole idea of, if this is a huge, like something that you're going to spend like a year in with your people, and there's going to be significant growth, they're going to have multiples of those. So, you may only be at the stage where you're doing one shots. In that case, a campaign arc is a little bit bigger than what you're doing. You're doing session arcs kind of thing. You're going to do one or two sessions. Campaign arc's a little bigger than that. And then if you get to where you're feeling like, I really like this and I want to take a group like all the way through a story, that's a campaign. And so just kind of make sure you know those differences too. You're not necessarily planning a campaign if you're just trying to do a one shot or two and get your feet wet in it. And the same with if you just decide to put enough of those together that there is a major goal. That's an arc. That's a campaign arc that we're talking about now. And then a whole campaign is many of those arcs together.
Right. Yeah. And all of those are beautiful and awesome, kind of thing too. I think that's really good to differentiate those. And also like, all of those are totally legitimate ways of gathering people and telling stories and stuff. So a lot of times I feel like I'm like, where can I play, and how can we make this happen? Is it going to be a 1? Is it going to be a 3? Is it going to be a 10-week thing? Or is this like our Thursdays where it's like, I see no end,
ongoing until we feel like it's done.
Yeah. So all those are really good ways to jump in and get your feet wet. So yeah, it's cool.
All right. I don't know if I have a whole lot more here on campaign arc. This is a weird one because it's kind of that middle. The campaign itself takes a lot of thought and like, for me, ruminating and reflecting and just like imagination. And that happens along the way in the campaign arcs. I'm going to fill in details that I maybe had just a rough idea of at the beginning. Then I have this part here where I'm hitting sections, and a lot of times for me that's goals. The next one can be a little more practical because it's like, okay, I'm coming into a session tonight. What do I need to have planned, and what's going to happen? And that's like the feet on the ground. And so we do want you to make sure to hit that one whenever that one is published here in a couple weeks. But let's go ahead for today. We're going to put a bow on the campaign arc planning. And again, we may have missed something that you have a question about as a GM. You're like, hey, I was really hoping you would answer this for me in this session. Do drop those in the haversack. Again, riseofthegm at gmail.com, or you can go onto any of our socials, Rise of the GM, and let us know. And we'll make sure to kind of even wrap that up as we're beginning to talk about sessions here in a couple times. But for now, we're going to go on to our NPC for the week, and Adam is going to divulge.
Yeah. So this is again from Masks from Gnome Stew. This is Kale Rodale, the eccentric wizard. Maybe this is one of the wizards having a competition from earlier. Who knows?
I was thinking about that as we saw these two again. Just so y'all know, these were kind of randomly placed, but they do often seem to fit that. Hey, this NPC looks like it could fit in this encounter starter we talked about. So this could be one of the wizards.
He says, "Forgive the gloves, but my order does not permit contact of the flesh. Now tell me where the relic is located, or I will demonstrate my vast knowledge in the ways of agony." Kale, this eccentric wizard, his appearance, he always is seen fully clothed with a high collar and gloves. Other than his face, no exposed flesh can be seen. As far as role-playing, his voice is smooth, so maybe not quite the way I just spoke. But need to read the thing first. His voice is smooth, and he smiles too much. He never touches anyone, and he refuses handshakes or other types of physical contact. His personality, he's oily and unscrupulous. He doesn't establish contact physically or emotionally with anyone or anything. He plays this off, often with a smile and a joke, by cutting off his physical contact. Cutting off all physical contact has left him completely dead emotionally. His motivations is that he is an adventurer in search of money, artifacts, and power. He desperately seeks satisfaction for all he has sacrificed physically and emotionally. Those who disrupt his drive are often dealt with harshly. The reason for this, he was born the son of a tavern owner, and was far more charming than smart, with desires to leave the town where he grew up. His charm gained him entry into a lesser-known school of magic, whose order required a prohibition of physical contact. He entered the school and became a proficient wizard. But after leaving the school, he traveled with several less than scrupulous adventures. Today, Kale is an established wizard with some wealth and power, but is always looking for more. This is Kale Rodale.
So what's great about this is, do think back to that encounter starter. Let's say those guys are in the back room having their little meeting and you spot them, and there's this guy as one of them. And let's say this is the guy that approaches your party. Right. It's highly likely that the people in your party don't really like this guy. I mean, he has that oily kind of aloof, won't touch you, wants what he wants for his power, but he's offering good money. And you're like, okay, we'll go get that for you. But then when you get to the room and you guys both walk in at the same time and there's that conundrum, you think back, I don't really like this guy anyway. If there's a way to make money or to like have some other sort of fun and be a little bit at his expense, that you might be more likely to do that. So then the question comes, when you look back in that back room and they're making that deal, is it two of these guys that are kind of oily and aloof and like everyone else is just pawns in their game? And so both parties don't really feel an allegiance? Or is he talking to someone who's kind of like the night and day? You got the Dumbledore in there talking to this guy, and it's like, oh, everybody loves him. He's so, kind and wise. And then this other group ends up, working for that guy, and you're like, oh man, maybe we should help them. I think that can have an effect. And so, playing this kind of character can have a little bit of influence on what kinds of responses your player characters might have, even if he hires them in relation to him.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
You were just getting ready to mute because that train's coming, weren't you?
Yeah, I can't tell the days. I think this even there's some other NPCs we've talked about with this, but I feel like even as again, I'm kind of thinking as a player, if I'm engaging with Kale Rodale here, I'm gonna be suspicious of the it's the power of like talking about like what they look like, how they dress, and how they interact with people, and a good call to do that with NPCs no matter what they are, and how like much they're supposed to be in your game, like to be able to do that. But as a player, I'm gonna be like, okay, what's the deal with this dude? And really from what this is saying, it's just about like that's the order that he's a part of. The rule is you don't have physical contact, kind of thing. And there's not really, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing, but there's not more to it. But I'm going to be wondering like, okay, like, is this guy like monstrous under those gloves, or like, what is he dead and this is an illusion, or like, those kind of things. And I think that even adds to the interest and is a good challenge to do that with our NPCs. I like him.
Yeah.
I think he's interesting. I don't know. I don't know much more to do with him than that. I'm stuck on the Wizards. I'm stuck on the Wizards having the competition, and I can't get out of that.
I think one thing that could be interesting, if you took this character and you decided to put him into a game and develop him out some, would be like, what's the purpose of no contact in the order?
Yeah.
Make up some stuff. First thing that comes to mind for me is that maybe we find out that when people touch and interact, life force is shared, which is why there's a connectedness and a cohesiveness among people who like are, the people you touch more, the people that you are more familiar with, there's a tighter bond. All this is invisible, but like in their order, they can be very aware of power moving between skin as people touch. And so their whole thing is about maintaining every bit of power. And so these things that pour into them are in no way connecting them to the rest of the world. And they're just this, there's a dam in them that bottles up all of the power. And so they become power hungry because all they want is this power. What you could play with that. And that doesn't have to be the reason. It could be something else, but you think about like, what could the reason be behind no contact in this order? And that might become a little story arc of its own, figuring out like, oh, this is why this order is like this. And because of that, boom, who knows?
Right.
So,
yeah.
There you go. A little NPC there that you might drop in. And again, you don't have to do any of these things we talked about, but you can just think, okay, here's this kind of oily guy who people stick their hand out to shake it. And he just kind of moves back and kind of plays with his own fingers and looks at them awkwardly and makes them feel awkward in the process.
I do have it's more about the encounter thing, but so we have Kale Rodale here, this oily, like not super, you don't maybe very dislikable. It seems like, and you have this other wizard who is everybody loves, and they're in this competition and they hired the other people. But we do a flipperoo where this guy may be oily and unscrupulous, but like isn't evil.
Maybe he's got the more honorable intentions.
Yeah, but this guy over here who everybody loves actually has ill designs for the relic, kind of thing. And I think that's you're talking about the how do you like get this player to trust finally. Last time, it's like, okay, this person never trusts, but how do you like put these things and help them like learn to trust, and then like destroy that trust by betraying and then try to do it, kind of thing. And I think that could be an opportunity there too, of like even like preconceived notions of, oh yeah, this guy's the best, and oh wait, no, he's like totally selfish and has evil designs, and the guy that we thought the whole time was the problem. That may be mixing too many things into that encounter, but I like those kind of things too.
Yeah. So let your imaginations run wild with that guy, and let us know if you use that. We got some Haversack questions we do want to get to today before we end. So we're going to jump to those right now, stick our hand into the Haversack and see what we can pull out.
Yeah. So to start, we have a quick question from Evan Bright. Um, and he said, how do you keep track of player character powers and abilities throughout a campaign?
Okay. I'm going to start by saying I don't often, except for what I can remember.
Yeah.
So after you've played enough characters, you have a general idea of how characters kind of progress and what powers they get where. And you have that kind of as background knowledge. And then based on kind of what they do and what new that they do each level, you get that in your mind.
Right. Right.
I have had times where I'm pretty sure someone is exploiting beyond the numbers.
Yeah.
Maybe they're, they have a certain number of key points and it's like, man, I use another key point. And you're like, wasn't that your 37th key point this round? And then I have to like kind of check on some things to make sure that they're not like way overpowering themselves compared to everybody else by not quite doing things as written. But I don't always want to be like the lawyer, the rules lawyer, or the the guy who's like looking for people to mess up or overdo things, because I want it to be fun, but at the same time I do want them to all kind of be level. So I don't want one person kind of exploiting their, maybe fibbing a little bit on how much they use or their rules, and like their powers are just too much because they're interpreting it incorrectly, whether on purpose or not, or using it wrong. So occasionally, I'll say, hey, and I know Adamson is like, hey, everybody, I want you to update your character sheets on. We have something we call the Conflux, some place where we, Discord, where we post our characters, say, hey, I want everybody, we just hit level 5. I want everybody to update all the stuff they have because I feel like I've gotten a little out of touch and I just want to kind of make sure I know what everybody's able to do and capable of. And then they know I'm going to be looking. And so they may kind of rein themselves in and kind of police themselves a little bit if they had started getting a little loose with interpretations or so on. But keeping track of the powers and abilities doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to cheat. Maybe it's just you like not being aware of, and how do you keep track of that? I don't a lot. They bring something up and they're like, yeah, this is a power I got at level 5. And I may have been a little bit unaware of that, but I just play it. I play the ball where it lies and go from there. I don't know if that is exactly answering the question that Evan had, or what exactly he was getting at there. What's your thoughts on that, Adam?
A lot and none at all. Like I fall similarly. That's not a thing I'm typically gonna like be really on top of, because I think I may be misquoting, but I'm going to quote yourself back to you, Evan, who I remember one time Evan saying, like, if someone is cheating at an RPG, then there may be more things going on than like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, we have more things to worry about, if we like a game that you can't really win, kind of thing. So, but I'm not like constantly on that. I'm like Matthew, I think there's some times where it's like, hey, I think I didn't really understand how you rolled 17 D10s to attack, or that kind of thing. Like, so I need to dig in there and see. I do think motivation of like GM, I'll just talk about myself. Like the times where I am like, man, I really need to like audit everybody. It's like, okay, what are my actual motivations for that? Is it I'm just trying to get a good understanding, make sure we're playing the game in a balanced way? Is it I want to like figure out a defense for every power that my players have? Because that's probably not cool. I need to watch that and make sure it's, well, my cleric has, 3 banishments. So I need to make sure that every villain has like 4 legendary actions, kind of thing, or legendary resistance.
Chris is like, I knew it.
No, it's which I am not. I feel bad shutting him down, but it's what they would do. So, so I need to check my motivations. I know when those things come up. But also I think the thing that I get the most, it's that player imbalance that I think you were talking about, Matthew, there a little bit of, it's like you got the dude who you have the player over here who is like blowing things away, or like they always have a trick, like for everything, or this every spell that they have, somehow they have like, it just seems like this mass amount of spells. And then you have person over here who like
Uses their
just,
bow.
yeah, it's like,
every
and
round.
they shoot one time and that's it. And it's like, I get concerned about the player, the power imbalance there, which does go
And
back to,
to be fair, it's not just like checking the guy who's super powerful to make sure he's not overdoing it. Sometimes it is the opposite. You got
exactly.
this
Yeah.
dude,
Right.
using his bow or his sword, and you're like, dude, let me look at your character. Hey, you have a shocking grasp that you can deliver through your
Yeah.
sword because you're a magus, and
Yeah.
and you could be doing your sword damage plus 10d6 when you do this, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I didn't know that. So sometimes you're keeping track of player
Absolutely.
characters and powers for them to like point out, hey, don't forget you can do more here.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of situations where it's like, hey, I think like the last several rounds you only attacked once, and you actually have like 3 attacks every round, like that. And it's like, if you're wanting to make that choice, cool, but like you can do more. Or so that's the thing I get more concerned with when if I am wanting to track. And I'd say like I would say, I don't know, every several 3, 4 levels, I'm typically wanting to like kind of engage a little bit and like, hey, could I just take a look at like what your new powers are, or maybe not even ask and just go into, it's like, if it's Pathfinder, I'm going to go to the D20 PFSRD and look up what's the rogue's ability at level 5, because I haven't noticed for a while. Do a little work there, a little inquiry. If you're doing like D&D 5e and using D&D Beyond, it's super easy. Like I know, like in my campaign, I can get into everybody's characters and peruse at will. So that makes it easy. But I think just like asking even for character sheets, if you're just like, and again, letting people know, like, I'm not trying to shut you down. I just want to like understand what this is. I do think there's a case, and it's part of what I love, but like not starting a game super high level or like mid-level even. It's like I like to start lower, because then you have the ability to grow together, and
Yeah.
they have the players have a good understanding of like, this is what I can do. I don't have to learn 7 levels of powers and stuff right away. But also, like, as a GM, it's like I don't have to learn 5 people's powers for
7
the last,
levels.
it's like
Yeah.
that's gets kind of crazy. But there's a piece of me that kind of likes being surprised too. I will say that, like, go back to Pip, the cleric. Like the first time he whipped out a banishment, I was like, what? And awesome. And dang it, like kind of thing all at the
What?
same time.
Awesome. Dang it. All in
You
quick
know,
succession.
those things, like, it's like, that was amazing. Great use of that spell. That really stinks, because that was kind of a big thing. And now everybody's just going to wail on it when it comes back. Or like Royal, Raziel last time pulled out a counter spell, like just counter spell, and I'm like, oh, like I've been waiting for a counter spell, and he just like whipped that out and just shut it down, and I'm like, yes, would be cool. Now I know you have that, so making note of those things, but
Yeah.
I don't want to like target, people's stuff either. So you got to kind of watch that. So hopefully that answered something. I don't know. But I think just like communicating that, hey, like, I just want to be aware of what everybody has. I do go back and forth with, like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I really want to know everybody's ACs, because I want to know if these creatures actually can hit them. But I also don't want to just be like always creating things at the tier that you are. It's like sometimes you do walk into the goblin camp and they can't touch you because you're that awesome, and not just like trying to play up to those levels. But yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my thoughts.
All right. What's our next one in the haversack?
So the second one here, the base question is, how do you deal with resurrection and revivify spells in your games. This one is from Clyde the Bard, and actually, just to give a little bit of background for all of you, this was a conversation that happened through our Instagram account, and I kind of wanted to distill that. That's the base question: how do you deal with resurrection and revivify spells in your games? But I wanted to share a little bit of the conversation because I kind of talked into this, but I'm not going to give everything. Clyde the Bard said, this is in the topic of resurrection and bringing players back from the dead in general. And he said, my main gripe with it is how easy it is for players to come back from the dead, which is at higher levels makes death an absolute non-issue unless you TPK, total party kill, which is also A, super difficult to do at higher levels in a compelling way, and B, not really something I believe GMs should be aiming to do. Totally agree. We shouldn't be just trying to kill everybody, I don't think. That's my thought. So the question was, how do you go about making death a very real threat while not making spells like resurrection and revivify completely redundant? And we had some conversation back and forth. I'm not going to share all of that, but a lot of it had to do with like when these things come into play, when players get a hold of revivify or resurrection, the stakes do in some ways lower, it feels like, because you can just, well, you died, but we can just bring you back. Like that's not as big of a deal, it seems like. So he was posing some questions about like, do you single out the caster in combat? Well, that's not cool. That's probably not what we should do. Just kill the healer every time, even though that could be a tactic. For some people, it's like, we know those people heal, so we got to take them out. It's a good player tactic. Do you make material so rare that it's really difficult to do? Do you?
Right. It takes 300 gold worth of diamonds.
It's
revivify.
Yeah, revivify, and it like incrementally goes up with like resurrection, and then like a true resurrection.
Yeah,
those are expensive, but there's a certain point where it's like, and again, we're talking kind of like 5e here at this point. It's like there's a certain point where like, 300 gold pieces, meh, and
right.
That's not as big a deal, but at first it would be. He kind of ended with, I understand that a GM shouldn't be trying to kill their players, but there's a stark contrast between trying to kill your players and trying to create an encounter where your players have to approach a situation where decisions are actually important. And I thought that was a really good thought, there. So my answers, for what it's worth here, and then I'd love for you to talk into your thoughts here, Matthew, is, I expressed my agreement. I feel like there is some like loss of stakes sometimes because of that. And it seems easier to just kind of come back from death at times than maybe it should. But one of the things I brought up was like consistency and communication, which I think could be across the board for a lot of these rules things. Are like, if we're having discussions about how do we deal with this, like letting players know, because, I wouldn't want, let's say Pip, which I don't know if I've seen him do these things, but I don't want Chris to like build his whole character around like being able to resurrect people, and then me to like say, oh no, that's not how it works anymore. Need to communicate those things with him. And also for there to be consistency across the game, the way we're doing things, even like, okay, what about NPCs that are being raised? Is it consistent in the way that we're treating those things? So I think that's really important. A thing I brought up, and this is not my original thing, but it's something I actually have started using. It just hasn't been seen very much because we haven't had a lot of death, but I'm actually adding a DC to those things now. Whatever system it's in, of like, if there is resurrection possibility or revivify possibility, that there still is a DC. It's very minor to start out with. I'm setting it as a 10 to start. So like if Matthew's character Eliakim dies tonight and they need to bring him back, DC 10 is what the DC to raise him, that the cleric or whoever is doing that's going to make use of. And the thing I also, and this may have been a critical role, or I don't know where Matt got it from, but like people even being able to make a kind of more of a ritual out of it, where the party, I remember a scene specifically where like one of the characters is like begging them to come back. It's like they are begging them to come back, and there was like a role made of even like, okay, this is adding to the bonus that the cleric's going to get. Or another like religious character was praying to their patron to like also empower this thing. They added stuff, and I really like that idea, even from, because I like the idea of death being a storytelling opportunity also, where it's not just like, okay, you got hit, you're dead. We're all going to just kind of do our own thing and loot the bodies while the cleric goes over, says he's back alive, and then he's up. Like I like the idea of that being more than just that. Adding the ritual thing. Some other ideas. Actually, I'm going to hold off. I have two more ideas, but I don't want to just keep talking. So, Matthew, what are your thoughts like in some of that stuff, and this idea of like, how do you deal with resurrection without lowering the stakes?
So back in the day when I played Pathfinder, first of all, I don't know if Revivify was around in Pathfinder. I don't remember Revivify. I remember Resurrection, which
Right.
was a higher level spell that they would have to go find a high enough level wizard, and I could make those
Yeah.
as scarce as I wanted to until they got up to those level themselves. But it was pretty high. And in those, I liked to. So I remember in the Oracle of Order campaign they started off each of them with one Philosopher's Stone, which would revive, resurrect one person. Each stone. So each of them basically had an extra life. Although Adam used 2 of those, and somebody else didn't get to use theirs at all. But this was a way to say, all right, you might get into something that you didn't expect would be as hard as it is, and then it kills you. You get a free 1-up. But then after that, you don't,
Right.
and you
Right.
can't just find these guys. That was a lot easier back then. Now, Revivify is a spell that's on people's spell list, and that's like you have 1 minute, up to a minute after they die. If you wait longer than a minute, it doesn't work, right? And so that's one
Yeah.
thing as a GM, you can kind of keep track of when they do it. If you make your battle last more than 6 rounds or 10 rounds, whatever it is, 6 seconds per
Yeah,
round.
yeah.
So that could be one thing. But then, okay, a couple thoughts here. First of all, it's a 3rd level spell. They don't have unlimited 3rd level spells, and they're doing other
True.
things as well. So they also, can't just revive everybody there is, especially if it's a really hard battle and say 2 people died.
Yeah.
They
Right.
might have to choose one and then figure out what to do from there. But beyond that, kind of keeping track of the spells and keeping track of the time, I'm kind of the opinion that when they get to a certain level and they pick these spells, and maybe they save all their 3rd level spells just for this because they want to be the guy who catches anybody who falls through like the net of a bad battle,
Right.
and they want to be that safety net. I want to give them the opportunity to have that kind of role. Now, what you're saying is you don't want death to just become like, meh, death, I got Revivify. Okay,
Right.
first of all, keep track of stuff because they can't just revivify everybody. Okay. Secondly, and I think Revivify is one of those you have to wait for a long rest. Just don't give them opportunities to rest a lot.
Yeah,
Okay. So
right.
they use those up in the first battle, but you got 3 or 4, 6 more battles before you're going to give them a long rest. They can't just use Revivify all the time. They're out.
true.
And that's part of that resource management. But secondly, I think, give them that opportunity to do that and think about like, where can I use this? And I got to be careful of how much I use. But then like in the times where you really want it to be this important, like, oh no, we better really consider because this might not work, is to have some places where Revivify and those sorts of things don't work, and they know about this before going in. So there's a module called Tomb of Annihilation, and in Tomb of Annihilation it says this: any spell that breathes life into the dead, including Revivify, raise dead, resurrection, true resurrection, automatically fail if cast on a humanoid whose soul is either trapped in a soulmonger or has been devoured by the Atropos. So he has these devices in the game. I think in this module they have these devices, these soulmongers that can trap a person's soul while they're still fighting and doing stuff. They can trap the soul, or this Atropal. I don't know exactly what that is. Devoured by this. I'm assuming that's a beast. That is specific to this Tomb of Annihilation. But you can have these sorts of things that if their soul happens to be in one of these two places, these don't work. Okay. And so then all of a sudden they get like a little more frightened. They're like, oh no. And so you wouldn't want to do this all the time. You wouldn't want to just be like, okay, and now the world that you're in is just full of these beasts that devour your soul and these things that trap your soul. And so your Revivify never works anymore. Save it for like really important, like epic battles, like the end. They get to this place and say in your world, you decide this is a thing from the very beginning. You're like worried that it's too easy to revive people. Okay. So in my game back in Pathfinder, I just decided I wanted to give them one extra life and they weren't going to be able to find a lot of wizards. So I built that in from the beginning.
Right.
You might build in from the beginning. You guys are in this world, and in this world, there are certain, devices around the world that, when you're in their presence, none of these things work. And you just know this from the beginning. I think it's like Adam was saying, you got to have that communication and it's got to be consistent. You can't just like out of the blue say, okay, now you're with a whole bunch of things and your spells don't work. And for your information, that's going to be that way now for the rest of this campaign. And that guy's like, great. I hate this game. So you don't want that, but you also want it to be important. You want them to have to think about death. So in addition to giving them enough battles that they run out of their third level spells, and then they have to get more, conservative in what they do, because they can't just like, poof, you only have so many of those. And the truth is it's probably very few, to be honest. So think about it as any other resource, right? When people start to run out of spells, they get a lot more cautious in how they come into battles, and everything becomes more important because I can't heal you the way I used to. I can't revivify if something goes bad. I can't do this. I can't do that. In addition, make a few places that even if they go in full strength, they know at the outset, this place is harmful because you cannot revivify when you're in this place. So those are some things I would do. The DC thing, when I was first thinking about it, I'm like, oh, that could be cool. But at the same time, you're taking like one of this person's like things that they're about, like right now I'm a guy who has like this blaster and flies a mobile, and I'm just a big cannon. And if suddenly like everything had, DR to my, my weapon that I hit with, I would start to feel pretty useless, and I would get bored, and I would start to tune out of the game. Yeah. And I think the same thing if you take away the complete ability to revivify, or if it just like gets too incredibly hard because this DC keeps climbing. Now that may all just be like in one setting, but I think the number of third level spells you're going to have already works as a limit on how many times that's going to happen.
That's true.
So you may not ever get to 17 deaths unless you have a whole party of clerics, and then you got other troubles because that's not well rounded enough to do most things. Yeah. So I think learning and here's something I had to learn as a GM. I would start when I was GMing, I'd be like, okay, here we go. We're in this session. There's a big battle. All right, now you guys can just sleep all night. All right, now here's a battle. Now you guys can sleep. You go in there and hole up in that room and sleep, whatever. I had to come to a place where I had to think enough in advance to think, okay, there's not going to be a rest point that they're going to have that's safe in these battles. Yeah. And my players would push it. They'd be like, can't we just go behind that door and all lean up against the door and rest? And I'm like, oh, you can try. And then they get all nervous and with good reason, because I was going to have something that could just easily push them all aside up against the door, right in the middle of their sleep, attacking them without their armor on, whatever. I had to get to a place where I could put enough battles that their resources went down. And then not just their spells, but their hit points and their rations. I had to think part of a game is, can I overcome you with my big bad when you're at full strength? But then part of the game is using up resources, and then making them get more cautious as those resources get less and less. And so that can be one way too. And I don't know. I agree, though. I do think, though I want to allow things like Revivify to be part of a character's power, I don't want it to become a hand wave and especially I don't want it to become where they're not paying attention to how many spells they have. And they're just like, oh, he's dead. Yeah, I have Revivify. I'll cast that on him. And it's like they're not really marking stuff down. I'll be like, okay, how
Right.
many of you used today?
Yeah.
All right. There might be some more battles,
Yeah.
but you can do that.
Right.
How many you have left? Okay. 1. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I'll say stuff like that. Then they're like, oh no, he's going to kill so many people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is really good of there being a limiter already, kind of thing in that. And something I just like maybe I want to flip and speak to just us as players too. That I think it's like worth both on so one question I think is like just a player in general is like, how do I want death to be dealt with as a player? And then from a healer standpoint, if you're playing like a cleric or a druid or somebody who can get a hold of these kind of things, or whatever your healer is in whatever system you're playing, how do I want to treat like resurrection so that it's not just like he's up, and there's fun to that of like, no, he's not dead anymore. But like, how do I play that out? And like, how does that become a story element as well and not just like a mechanic? And again, I'm speaking into some types of fun here where maybe the fun that you're having is saying, haha, no, alive, kind of thing. And that's all you want. That's cool. But I do think from like the greater story, there is some interest. Like I think about, so the Frozen Vale of Tears in Matthew, your game, Dormant Mind, there was like, we could not rest because we were taking damage if we touched the floors, the walls. Like we did all kinds of ideas to try to figure out how can someone lay down for 6 hours or 8 hours and like rest. And it's like, no, there's just not, it's too cold. We're taking damage like constantly because of the frigid temperatures. It's not safe. We cannot, like, resting is not possible. And there was definite like attrition of our resources. And like for me, Barbarian, it's like my resource is kind of my giant sword and my rage. So like I had a lot of rages, but who was really being taxed was our healer, was Josh, and that healing was slowly being eked away throughout all of this. And we were so used to like, I was used to, I lost 80 hit points in this battle. And now I'm back up to full because he
Can you just
touched me,
off here?
kind of thing. And no big deal. And I think I'm trying to remember when the timing was, and I'm going to get to the point eventually, but like it may have been even before we entered in there, but it definitely was during that, because that was a lot of sessions that we were like doing things within that. And Cormac, my barbarian, it wasn't just, it was me, but it wasn't like just me as a player. Like this is how I always want to deal with things. But Cormac was starting to feel very thin, was the story I was telling with him, was like, I am only surviving on these healing magics. I am a destroyed husk of a person because I am being devastated every time we have a fight. I am on death's door every time. And the only thing holding me together is this like celestial healing magic that constantly is being infused into me. Like I don't even feel like myself anymore, kind of thing. That was the story I was wanting to tell with him. And there was a point where I remember I had a conversation with Josh, the healer, Kairos. He's playing Kairos, our healer, amazing healer. But like I had a player to player conversation with him, but also there was an in-game conversation, Cormac to the team, of like me saying to Josh, like, hey, like as a player, like I don't want Cormac raised from the dead. Like if he dies, he dies, kind of thing. And I don't want, because he had ability to like resurrect. Like Cormac is not, he's like feeling too thin. He feels like he's not even a person anymore. If he dies for whatever reason, and so we had that as a player, we needed to communicate that, but Cormac's speaking that also of like, I don't even, he's having a conversation with Amira about like, I don't even feel like myself anymore, and those kind of things. So I think
Here's something to throw in the middle of that. I remember in that case that I think Kyrus probably still would have tried to bring you back to life at that point, even though you had asked. But he was, in fact, enthralled from a failed will save. He was enthralled upstairs in a different room.
That's right.
And so those kinds of things can happen too. Think, okay, who are the people who can revivify? There's things that can, so like in the campaign that Jade Mask we're playing now, I'm like an incredible blaster, but my will is horrible. And if he ever like has somebody who like can charm or dominate, my guy like has big troubles.
Right.
And so, yeah, you think about that. Not everybody's going to have Revivify. So just because somebody has it, there's not always the case that they're going to be able to use it, even if they would, as is the case with Kyrus and Cormac. Kyrus was upstairs kind of stuck in a failed will save, while Cormac was down there getting his chest beat in by an ice giant.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So tell good stories. That's my thing. And I don't know that I've ever played. We had that conversation. Like I played that priest that one time, but not really like playing the healer. I love to have the like healing word to be able to get people back in the fight, but like not really the resurrector. But I think there's something cool even as like a player, not making the DM create this giant ritual of things, but like as a player, I'm going to bring this in, and party, please come in here because we need to focus our energy here as we are preparing this body to be brought back if they desire, and like actually playing that out, I think is like a really cool player move of let's tell the story of this too, and not just like making a mechanical thing and then let's move on. So that's my 2 cents on that too.
All right. So I think we're going to let that be our last question for today. We have another question that's stuck in the haversack we'll pull out next time. But we're so glad you guys could join us here on Rise of the GM. Yeah. Don't forget, we won't have our normal planning episode next week, but we will have a little Thanksgiving feast episode that'll happen. So do join us for that. Don't forget, you can go to riseofthegm at gmail.com and leave a question for us. You can go on any of our socials and keep up with us there. We are so thankful for all of you guys who watch and are part of this. But for now, you guys have a great Thanksgiving weekend. We'll catch you afterwards.